Children are innocent and pure by nature, and even the thought of them doing something evil or committing heinous crimes just seems impossible. But believe it or not, there have been more than a few cases of juveniles committing crimes so horrible that they were actually tried and sentenced as adults. These cold-hearted kids whose offenses would make the bravest of us shiver in fear were, however, unable to hide their emotions when they were given strict sentences. Some cried and wailed, while others only offended the judges and juries even more by their pretentious behavior, but all of them were made to pay for their wrongdoings. Here now are 20 most dangerous kids reacting to serving life in prison. Number 1. Roxana Sikorsky. Roxana was a Plymouth Township teenager who pled guilty to plotting to take the lives of her family back in 2014. The 15-year-old conspired with her older boyfriend to take the lives of her adoptive parents and younger brother, and prosecutors charged her as an adult for the attempted attack. But her parents defended her, saying that she suffered from a mental illness and was under the sway of her 23-year-old boyfriend Michael Rivera. Roxana started out as an ideal child who just began acting out when she hit adolescence. She was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder and was put on medication. She met Rivera on Facebook and her behavior became worse as she began sneaking around with him. She even ran away with him for a few days and was found at his house. She apparently wanted to take their lives because the parents filed a statutory assault complaint against Rivera on October 17. Of that year, Rivera planted himself outside the family's home and texted Roxana instructions on what to do. The teenager attacked 12-year-old Lucas, and after attempting to do the same to her sister, she fled the house but was arrested at Rivera's home, where she told the police that they were planning to get married. She was tearful during sentencing and apologized to her family for all that she had done. She was trembling and weeping, and her remorse was quite visible. But that didn't stop the judge from sentencing her to up to 20 years behind bars for the crimes that she had committed. Number 2. Lionel Tate. Lionel Tate is perhaps the youngest American citizen to have received a sentence of life imprisonment for his crimes. The boy was 14 years old in 2001 when he would be convicted for taking the life of a 6-year-old named Tiffany Unick in 1998 in Broward County, Florida. Tate's mother Kathleen was babysitting the two children when she decided to leave the boys alone with Tiffany to take a short nap upstairs. His lawyer defended him, saying that the 12-year-old boy weighed a whopping 165 pounds and was just playing with the 6-year-old girl. He argued that Tate accidentally hurt the girl while he showed her professional wrestling moves. Her liver was lacerated as a result of the blows. And she also sustained many other injuries, which included a skull fracture, fractured ribs, and swelling in the brain. The prosecution stated that the girl would have sustained similar injuries if she had fallen from a 3-story building. Judge Jolty Lazarus sentenced Lionel Tate to life in prison, saying that his acts were not that of a playful child. He behaves in a cold, callous, and cruel manner towards her, and Tate remained mostly expressionless and silent during sentencing. In 2004, a state appeals court overturned his conviction on the basis that his mental competency had not been evaluated, and eventually he would be released on 1 year's house arrest and 10 years probation. Number 3. T.J. Lane. T.J. Lane was a 17-year-old juvenile and former student at Chardon High School, and on February 27, he took the lives of 3 Chardon High students and injured 3 others. Witnesses stated that Lane had personal problems with one of his victims. They used to ride the same bus as the victims to school. The boy used a .22 caliber handgun, and 2 of the wounded students were hospitalized, and one of them sustained injuries that left him permanently paralyzed. Lane was indicted on 6 counts, but because he was 17 years old at the time that he committed the crimes, he was detained as a juvenile while the authorities decided whether or not to try him as an adult or a child. He would end up taking the lives of 3, and he wasn't even sorry for taking them. He arrived wearing a blue button-down shirt, but when he sat down he unbuttoned it, revealing the shirt that he was wearing underneath it was a white t-shirt with the word killer written on it. He was given a chance to speak to the court, but he only made the situation worse for himself by saying some incredibly hateful things to his victims' families, even laughed at the mother of a victim while she made a statement. Lane pled guilty to all the charges and given 3 life sentences without parole. Number 4. Antonio Barbo. Antonio was just 14 years old when the court sentenced him to 36 long years in prison. The boy was convicted for taking the life of his 78-year-old grandmother in what seemed to be a blitz attack. He used a hatchet to assault the poor old woman and was visiting Barbara Olson's home along with a friend named Nathan. The two boys were planning to steal money from her house. They plummeted on her using a hatchet and a hammer, and the entire community was shocked by how mercilessly and brutally they assaulted not just any woman, but his own great-grandmother. When Antonio was sentenced, he was given a chance to read out his statement, but he was too emotional to finish it. He burst into tears while speaking as the severity of his punishment dawned on him. He was unable to keep going, and his attorney stepped in and read the statement on his behalf, who also got tearful. While doing so, reports would state that Antonio's grandmother had invited the two boys inside her home in 2013. Not knowing what they would do to her, Judge Timothy Von Akron said that the 36-year sentence was a minimum punishment for what Antonio had done. He also confessed that he had never seen anything like this horrendous crime in 24 years as a career judge. Number 5, Stuart Harling. Stuart Harling was an introverted teenager who spent most of his time in the virtual world of ultra-violent computer games and inappropriate websites. No one knew that in the darkness of his room, he was plotting to be a famous serial killer. A 19-year-old abandoned his family and career and accountancy and dedicated himself to his fantasies, but soon realized that wasn't enough. So he decided to take the life of 32-year-old Cheryl Moss. He later told psychiatrists that he decided to become a serial killer after watching a documentary on the infamous crimes of Richard Ramirez, who robbed 13 people of their lives in the Los Angeles area. He explained that he felt nothing while hurting Miss Moss, and to him she was like any other animated enemy on a computer screen and one of his games. Judge Brian Barker sentenced the young man to a minimum of 20 years in prison. And he also spoke to Stuart and said that he had demonstrated that his horrifying actions meant very little to him. Number 6, Jessica Conlon. The 17-year-old Jessica crashed a car into the Wyoming Medical Center, and as a result, 2 people lost their lives. She pled guilty to 2 counts of vehicular homicide. She would be driving a vehicle eastbound on 2nd Street approaching the Wyoming Medical Center when the vehicle swerved over the curb and hit a sign just in front of the hospital and then the building itself. 27-year-old Brandon Avery and Amanda Strickland, also 27, died because of the injuries that they sustained in the crash. Conlon was also injured, but did survive. Later on, investigators discovered a can of air duster inside the car. And in an interview with police she admitted that it made her high. It was also determined that the car was going as fast as 76 miles per hour at the time of the collision. No one was wearing their seatbelts, and the judge would sentence her to between 12 to 16 years in prison. Jessica was incredibly emotional at the trial, and tears could be seen rolling down her flustered face while she spoke in the court and displayed her remorse. Number 7, Caleb Sharp. Caleb Sharp was the perpetrator of the Freeman school shooting tragedy. He was sentenced to spend 40 years in prison by the judge and pled guilty for taking the life of a classmate and injuring 3 others in the 2017 Spokane shooting. The students were in the hallway when he assaulted them, and the courtroom was full of people. The day that he was sentenced, more than 200 people shared impact statements and urged the judge Michael Price to impose the maximum sentence before he sentenced the young man. The defense attorney asked for a 20-year sentence, but the prosecution proposed 35 years to life. Sharp will receive credit for 5 years that he's already spent in jail. And prior to his sentencing, he apologized to his victims and the mother of the boy Sam Strahan, who died in the shooting. He asked for their forgiveness while speaking to the court, though he didn't react or display any emotion when The Simpsons was announced. Number 8, Bevere brothers. Back in 2015, 5 members of the Bevere family were found dead in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. 2 family members, a 2-year-old baby girl and a 13-year-old girl, fortunately survived. The older girl identified 2 of her elder brothers, Robert, who was 18, and Michael, who was 16, as the assailants. The 2 young men were eventually arrested and were charged for their crimes. According to testimony, Robert wanted to become a famous serial killer. He pled guilty to the charges against him in 2017 and was then sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Michael, on the other hand, also gave a frightening testimony and was convicted by the jury. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms. Michael initially smiled when his sentence was read and then wiped his eyes. Besides that, the brothers mostly remained emotionless. Number 9, Alex and Derek King. The young Alex King appeared to be well-spoken, neat and sharp in court. Looking at him, no one would think that he was capable of committing a heinous crime. The 12-year-old Alex, along with his 13-year-old brother, took the life of his own father, Terry King, on November 26, 2001. The two boys beat their father with an aluminum baseball bat and then set fire to the family home in Cantonment, Florida. A family friend named Ricky Chavez was also convicted for being an accessory to the crime as he hid the boys in his trailer. Terry was 40 years old at the time of his death. The two boys claimed that they did this to put an end to the mental abuse that they had suffered at the hands of their father. According to them, he would stare them down and spank them going out of their way. Prosecution tried both Chavez and the boys for the same crime. Chavez, however, got acquitted, but the King brothers were convicted. Derek King was sentenced to 8 years in prison, while Alex received a 7-year sentence in 2002. At the age of 18, Alex was released after serving 6 years, and Derek would be released in March of 2009. At the age of 20, the boys calmly testified in court and during sentencing that they stood still expressionless with their heads down. Number 10. Philip Chisholm. Philip Chisholm may have been a 14-year-old boy, but he committed heinous crimes that landed him in prison for life. He assaulted and then took the life of his own math teacher. Colleen Ritzer was a Danvers High School teacher who lost her life at the hands of her own pupil. Salem Superior Court Judge David Lowy described Chisholm as brutal and senseless when he pronounced the sentence. He also stated that Colleen Ritzer lived a life of quiet heroism and the crashing waves of this tragedy will never wane. Philip's lawyer argued that he was mentally ill, but this contention was rejected by the jury. He would be sentenced to serve life in prison with the possibility of parole in 25 years. He also received 40 years concurrent sentence for the abuse and robbery charges. Judaism's mother Diane sobbed quietly when he was sentenced, and she also apologized to the Ritzer family for what her son had done. He stood in front of the judge with a poker face, showing no emotions and expressing no remorse for his actions.